Hello, welcome. If you own a BMW motorcycle and you have Shift Assist Pro installed on your bike and you're not happy with the gear shift, then this video may well help you. Now, before we start, I know some people that watch YouTube videos have a very short attention span and they only want to spend a few minutes trying to get the information that they want. And I'm quite happy with that normally, but this time I suggest you listen to what's coming up for this first 10 minutes because there's a lot of information I need to share with you before you start the process. We need to manage your expectations, and there are some hints and tips that you really should be doing before you start the process. But of course, you're free to decide what you want to do. So if you want to skip to the bit where I show you how to do it, how I've done it on my 1250, then by all means. But my recommendation is you listen to this first section. But we have got quite a lot to cover. So what I think we really should do at the very beginning is talk about expectations, the management of your expectations of what's going to happen. So the easiest way to explain this, with the BMW four-cylinder bikes and above, so for example, the K1600, the S1000 single R, double R, the XR and the M versions of those bikes, your expectation after doing a Shift Assist Pro recalibration can actually be quite high because lots of owners report a very positive experience. So if you've got a four-cylinder bike or more cylinders from the BMW range with Shift Assist Pro, this reset procedure can provide quite a lot of benefits. Now, if we have the S1000 XR, for example, up here with a high expectation, sadly, unfortunately, we have to say that at the bottom here, we've got the R series motorbikes. So that's the R, the RS, the RT, the GS and the GSA. And then somewhere in the middle in terms of what your expectations could be, would be the F series motorbikes because they respond a little bit better. Now, of those R series bikes, the R, the RS, the RT, the GS and the GSA, we have to actually separate those into two categories because those first three, the R, the RS and the RT, generally have a better gear shifting experience for their owners than the GS and the GSA owners. So why is that? Well, the first thing is you would imagine that because the engine and the gearbox are of a very similar design, there's differences with gear ratios and things, but the main difference is the height of the suspension and the angle at which the drive shaft drops that rear wheel on the road because we've got taller suspension. So with the higher suspension, with that increased angle from that drive shaft, things get a little bit more clunky and a little bit less smooth. Now, one way that you can try this, and I did this last week to make sure I was right, and that is if I take my bike, this is a 2021 onwards R1250GS. If I set the suspension preload, that's the suspension preload on the left-hand side on the handlebar, and I set it to minimum and I go for a ride, and then I stop after about 20 minutes and change the suspension preload to maximum where the back of the bike comes up and the suspension extends, I can notice a deterioration in the gear shift quality. So this partly explains why owners of the R, the RS and the RT generally experience a better gear shifting experience. So hopefully that's covered your expectations because if we, for example, if we're going to take 100 GS and GSA owners and we did this reset calibration on those bikes, I would think from my experience, probably 10 to 20% of owners are going to say, I didn't experience any difference, no change. Then there'll be 30% of those owners, and unfortunately I fall into this category because I did mine last week, that there is a small improvement and it's nothing to write home about. It's not a huge improvement, but there was a noticeable but small improvement. And then we move to the next 30% of those 100 owners. They're liable to say, actually, it was quite a good improvement and things have smoothed up. And then right at the top, the last 10 or 20% will say that there's been quite a big improvement. So we have to just bear that in mind and manage our expectations because not everybody with an R series motorbike that does this calibration process is going to notice a huge improvement. Now, we talked at the beginning about the four-cylinder bikes and above, the K1600 and in particular the S1000 RR and the M series. When owners do the recalibration of their bikes, they talk about a buttery smooth gear change. So you are not going to experience that with a GS. It's never going to happen. So just manage your expectations. So then we need to move on to what I've actually used for this process. But before I do that, what I should highlight is that I'm going to be using some equipment that is quite expensive to buy. And there are different types of equipment that you can use, different modules, different bits of software. The simplest, most cost-effective way for you to see whether there's going to be an improvement is to take your bike to your BMW dealership and ask them to do a recalibration of the Shift Assist Pro mechanism, and they can do it. Now, BMW are not going to want thousands of people going back just to have that done, so I would suggest to make it easier for your dealer and easier for you in terms of cost is to ask for that to be done the next time your bike goes in for a service or some warranty work or some recall notifications, and ask them, obviously, have your software updated and also at the same time have this recalibration process carried out. So before we get into the actual recalibration process, a couple of things about the products I'm going to be using today. But the first thing is I'm not associated with HEX Innovate. This is a HEX GS-911 unit. This is what I use in the workshop. It's an absolutely brilliant tool for helping me doing customer service on their bikes, brake fluid changes, service light reset, and so many other things. It's really a brilliant bit of kit, but they are quite expensive. But this video is not sponsored by them. So if you do have any questions about your bike, maybe you have an F-Series motorbike or you have an S-Series motorbike, if you've got questions, please don't ask me. I'm not connected with HEX. Send your email inquiries to HEX because they've got a really friendly team and they'll be able to advise you about the process, the procedure for doing your motorbike, because it does vary ever so slightly between motorbikes. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go through the video. So I'm not connected with HEX. The next thing is there are three things that you should really do before you start this process. Now, the most important one is if you're going to do this on a Saturday, make sure on the Friday evening you plug your bike into the trickle charger and you make sure your battery is fully charged. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've started doing this on somebody's bike and then halfway through the process the software detects that the voltage level has dropped below a certain threshold and it switches itself off and says it can't continue, and it is really frustrating. So I've learned over the years to do two things. The first thing is to ask the customer to make sure that the bike is fully charged the night before. That ensures the bike comes fully charged before I start, and then I actually use a trickle charger connected to the motorbike while I'm doing the reset procedure. And what that enables me to do, because there are so many options within the software that comes from HEX Innovate, it is very easy to get distracted, and you can spend 10, 15, 20 minutes going through all the menu systems and looking at the things that you can change. Maybe you've got an older generation GS that's only got 3 settings for the heated grips and you want to turn that into 5. You can do that on the S1000RR as well, for example, or you want to add the sports screen, or all these things that we do. It just takes time and it will flatten the battery in about 7 minutes. That's all I give myself if I'm not connected to a trickle charger before I know I'm going to have problems, and that battery voltage will go below the certain threshold, and then this just turns itself off. Well, not the device, but the software will say there's a low voltage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, now I can't tell you in all honesty that this makes a big difference, but I like to ensure the bikes are up to normal operating temperature. So I take them for a 20-minute ride. I make sure the oil and the engine cases and the transmission cases, everything's nice and warm before I do the recalibration process. Now, whether that actually makes any real world difference, I don't know, but that's the way I prefer to do it. My thinking process is that's how we ride the bikes, so that's how I should be setting it up when I'm doing the calibration process. Now, the last one I want to mention before we start, and you'll see all this on the screens in a moment, is within the software, you can do an auto scan, and I suggest you do an auto scan right at the very beginning and see what faults your system has recorded for your motorbike. Now, why do I mention that? Well, sometimes, depending on the fault codes that the system detects, it won't let you proceed with a recalibration unless those fault codes are cleared first of all. So it can be quite confusing. So what I suggest you do is run auto scan first, have a look at the list, and don't worry, I'm going to show you that in a moment on the screen. Have a look what fault codes you've got on your motorbike. Take your phone, take a picture, and then go and talk to your BMW dealer to find out whether this is something you should be worried about or something they need to look at. Quite often with electrical systems, what I find and many technicians find is that quite often you can do a reset all, which gets rid of all the fault codes, but take a picture first and then restart the bike, take it for a ride, come back, and quite often there are no more fault codes. They're all gone, they're all cleared, which is an indication that it's an intermittent sensor fault. Quite often on the GS, for example, you have the tire pressure warning sensors. They come up as faulty, but there's nothing wrong with them. So there's lots of little glitches in there. And what I would recommend you do is take pictures of the fault codes it picks up, then clear them and then proceed. And this just makes the whole process of what we're about to do with the recalibration more likely to proceed all the way through unrestricted. What else can I tell you? There is quite a bit of discussion as to whether or not you should be doing this with the bike stationary on the center stand or whether you should do it out on the road. I haven't got any experience with doing this out on the road. I probably should actually do that and test it and compare it. Some owners, mainly with the S series motorbikes, say that when they do the recalibration with the bike out on the road, so in other words, they take the bike, they find a nice empty straight stretch of road, they pull over, they access the system with their phone, they start the recalibration process, and then they drive down the road physically on their bikes during that recalibration process, and they say that that makes quite a big difference. Now, I can't comment either way, and what I'll try and do later in the year when I have time is I'll do that and see if there's any difference. So then, how do we connect our GS-911 unit to our motorbike? Well, there are different places and locations for the OBD port connectors. Depends on the year of your motorbike. There is OBD1 and there is OBD2. They're two different sorts of connection port connectors, and they also communicate in a different language. So on the 1250, we've got OBD2, and it's situated behind here, behind the battery cover. So all we need to do is take our TX25 and remove or loosen off that one top left-hand screw, and then gently with our fingers lift off the cover to reveal our battery. Now, the part that we're looking for is situated to the right-hand side, and there is a little tab stopping this coming out. I'm going to put my finger in here, just gently push it to one side, and then this connector just comes straight out. Now, the connection port does have a dust cap on there. It's held on by these clips. There's one each side, and I'm just going to grip those top and bottom, press in firmly, and then wiggle this bottom dust cap off the bike. And then that reveals our OBD2 connector. Now then, it is really straightforward. The GS-911, this is a keyed connection, so we can't get this wrong. We can't get it upside down. It is only going to fit one way. We just need to make sure that those pins in there are straight. There's nothing bent inside. And we're just going to push firmly all the way in, and it clicks into place right at the top. So now this device is ready to connect to our laptop. We've got our old-fashioned USB port on here, and we can connect this to our laptop or our Android phones or our Apple devices, but I'm going to use a laptop to make it easier for you to see all the settings and the procedure that we're going to take. So we're ready to move on to the next step. So we've now got the GS-911 unit connected to the bike. The ignition is not turned on yet, but we've opened the software. Now, as I mentioned in the list very early on, the very first thing you should do is go and get the latest software update pack. So I'm currently using 2502.3. So then what we want to do, we're going to go back to the home page. I'm going to turn the ignition on the bike. Bear in mind, I've also got the trickle charger on so that we're not going to have any low battery voltage warnings. Now, the very first thing we want to do is this one here, which is detect vehicle. We click this once, and this tells us that, as you can see up here, it has detected the R1250GS. So this is a good place to start. So we now use this bottom button here. We're going to go back. And as I mentioned very early on, we need to do an auto scan first before we do anything else. So we're going to click auto scan. It's going to scan all the different modules on the bike, and it's going to report any error codes or problems that it has detected and it has recorded, and it's going to display that down here on the right hand side in a moment. So these are the auto scan results. Now, as we can see from the controller summary here, because I've already done my bike, I can't there was some error messages on there which I've cleared. We've now got the controller summary with OK under all the main segments, and obviously we can see our battery voltage, and just bear in mind my battery was fully charged overnight yesterday and it's currently on the trickle charger and it's only just above the threshold, which is 12 volts to perform the test. Now you can scroll through all of these options and look at all the different controllers, but we know we don't have any faults because it's saying here, for example, fault code 0, no faults found. And if you did have some, you would scroll right to the bottom and then you would do a reset. So that's the very first thing we need to do. Go back to the home page, and now we can start the recalibration process. So what we need to do now is go to detected vehicle. Click on this once, and the system's going to communicate with the bike, and what we actually want under here is the engine controller. This is the top one here, so we're going to click engine controller once, and then of these 5 options we want service functions. So I'm going to click service functions. Then that's going to give us a drop-down menu of 3 options. We want adaptations and calibrations. That's going to drop down a further menu of 7 options. And the one that we want to do today is this one here called reset transmission. So we click this once. Now this is going to go away to the bike and check and record the voltage values that are currently set for each of the gear selections. So at this point here, I suggest you take a picture of this with your camera and record it before you do any resetting. Now I've obviously did my bike last week, so there is going to be very, very little difference between what I reset and these settings on the screen, but you would take a picture and you're going to see some differences. So what we do at this point, I'll just tell you this, what we're going to do before I click the button. We're going to click the continue button, and then it's going to give us some instructions of what to do. We need to make sure that the battery voltage is okay. We've got it connected to the trickle charger. And then we are going to perform the reset and the recalibration on the bike. So we'll click continue. In the background, you can hear the bike clicking and whirring. And now it's telling us on the screen up here, turn the ignition off. So if I turn the ignition off, watch the screen. Now it tells me to turn the ignition on. I turn the ignition on. And now it's telling us up here, service function completed successfully. So now we actually need to do the recalibration. So what we need to do now is start the bike up, and I'm going to put up a different video at the moment so that you can see this next clip. I'll start the bike up. So now with the engine running and the bike in neutral, I'm going to pull in the clutch and change down into first gear. I'm going to slowly release the clutch and I'm going to count to 10. Now what you will notice is that the gear indicator, in this case number 1, is flashing. It will flash for about 6 seconds, and then you need to add an additional 4 seconds during this time period. So we want a total of 10. Then I'm going to pull in the clutch, go into second gear. The second gear indicator is flashing. Again, this flashes for 6 seconds. We're going to wait for that to stop, and then we're going to add an additional 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull in the clutch, move into third gear, slowly let the clutch out. Again, it's flashing to tell us it's doing its calibration. At this point, we just need to wait for that flashing to finish and then add an additional 4 seconds on the end. Then we can again pull in the clutch, move into fourth gear, and repeat the process. So you know what's going to happen. We're just going to wait for that flashing to stop, add an additional 4 seconds at the end, pull in the clutch up into fifth. It's flashing again to tell us it's doing the process. We just wait for this to complete, add the 4 seconds on the end, and then you guessed it, we're going to move up into sixth gear, slowly let the clutch out and let this process finish. Now, I will talk about a couple of other things in a moment, but let's just wait until this is finished. So we're now at the end of 10 seconds. I'm going to pull in the clutch. I'm going to go all the way down through the gearbox, back into first gear, and then up into neutral. And now I've finished the process. So now I can turn the bike off, turn the ignition off, and now we can go back to the laptop and have a look and see what has changed in terms of those shift value voltages. So we've done the calibration process on the motorbike. Now what we want to do is have a look at the settings. So what we need to do is return the ignition on. That's the first thing we need to do. We're going to go back to the home screen and start the process again. We're going to click on detected vehicle. The ignition is on the bike. We've got the R1250 on the top. Engine controller. We're going to go to the bottom option, service function. Then we're going to choose this middle one, calibrations. And then we're going to move down this list until we get to reset transmission. We're going to click that. Now we do not want to click the continue button. These are going to be your new values. So the bike has been recalibrated. Now you can just shut everything down, take your bike for a ride. Do not click the continue button. We're going to click the cancel button, and then we are going to exit all the way out. And we're ready for a go for a road test. We need to obviously disconnect it from the bike, unplug the GS-911, but we are finished with the calibration process. So before we finish, a couple of things I'd like to share. If you've been following the channel, the GS series has been going on for about 3 years now, and you'll know if you've been following me that I just have not been using the Shift Assist Pro going up through the gearbox. I find it too violent, and I have something which is referred to as mechanical sympathy for my gearbox for a motorbike that I hope to own for many years to come. So I don't want to put all those stresses through the gearbox, because for me it is quite a violent change. Now also, doing this testing process has been quite difficult for me. The resetting procedure is really straightforward. It is very easy, takes you about 20 minutes. But for me, after 3 years of not using Shift Assist at all going up through the gearbox, there's been quite a learning process for me. So when I did the initial filming of this video, I said that I was in that lower 30%, whereby there was an improvement, but it wasn't very much. But actually, the more I've ridden the bike, I've had to relearn how to use that system. And there are some things I'd like to share. So I still don't use it between first and second. Too violent, too clunky. But between second and third, what I found is if you upshift early in the RPM range, that's at about 3000 RPM, it's not bad. It's not super smooth, but it's usable. And then when you're going third to fourth, fourth to fifth, fifth to sixth, going up through the gearbox, you need to be in a higher RPM. You need to be about 4,500 RPM with a constant throttle, with the throttle on, not rolled off, not off completely. And in those conditions, the shifting mechanism actually does a very good job. So I'm still going through the process of learning how to re-ride my motorbike using the Shift Assist Pro, and I quite like it. And especially, I took my wife out at the weekend, we did some two-up riding, and I did find in those higher gears, that fourth to fifth, fifth to sixth, it is actually quite smooth if you get the RPM just right. So you do need to experiment and have a play with changing gear at different RPMs and find the RPM that offers you the smoothest change. Now, one more thing. Earlier in the season, I think it was way back last year, when I did the 2-year review of the GS, I did talk about a physical hardware change that you might be able to do to the gear shift mechanism that would offer an improvement. Now, the chap that did that development was a guy called Edward. Now, Edward's like me, he's an engineer, a technician, a mechanic, and Edward came up with a way to physically modify the shifting mechanism on the side, taking the module off on the side, splitting it open and making some changes to the shims inside and drilling some holes. Now, Edward did this to 5 GS motorbikes. 4 of them reported a positive response, 1 reported no change whatsoever. So between us, what me and Edward decided to do was not to make a video about it, because the last thing we want to happen is for someone to pick up a relatively new motorbike, a 2023, a 24, or maybe even you've picked up one of the very last 2025 GSAs. You might decide that your gear shift isn't as good as you anticipated, and then if you watch that video, which we didn't make, and then you did a hardware change, you would have invalidated your warranty, and there is really no way back from that. So we decided the best thing to do was not to release a video or to talk more about it, because we don't want lots of people with invalidated warranties because they tried something and it didn't work. So what we've covered today, I think, is the best opportunity for you to try to make a change, an improvement to your bike. If you've got, as I mentioned earlier on, the 4-cylinder or the 6-cylinder bikes, it does make quite a bit of difference. The F-Series also can provide quite a bit of difference from the reset. And also the R, the RS and the RT, they also benefit quite nicely from it. But unfortunately, those of us with the GS and the GSA, it's a bit of a hit and miss affair. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed today. I will be back soon. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.